Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Legal Value Network webinar for today, entitled Hype versus Value, Delivering Value from Innovation. I'm going to kick us off with a short introduction about LVN, and then we'll jump into our content for today. Please also answer our slightly tongue-in-cheek pop culture hype question in the Zoom poll that we have up. So I will be your moderator today. My name is Amani Smathers. I'm Senior Practice Innovation Specialist at Chapman & Cutler, a law firm focused on financial services clients. I'm also a licensed attorney, though I've focused my career in the legal technology and innovation teams at my current firm and previously at Davis Wright Tremaine and Seyfarth Shaw. I'm also co-teaching a course at Michigan State College of Law this spring on delivering legal services, which introduces students to many business of law concepts that we are familiar with. I'm very grateful today to have two highly experienced speakers with us who are both leaders in applying innovative methods and tools to challenges within the legal industry. Today, we'll hear from Anna Maria Norbury, who is Director of Global Services Design at Baker McKenzie, where she leads the innovation program using design thinking to reimagine and reinvent the services that Baker delivers to clients. And Raj Goyle, a co-founder and CEO of Badala. Badala is a legal technology platform that empowers businesses to analyze, interpret, and optimize outside counsel spend. Before we jump in, I do have some announcements and housekeeping items. These webinars, which you have joined, are organized by the 2021 LVN Education Committee, comprised of about 15 professionals from law firms, in-house legal departments, and business partners who've been working for months to develop a full slate of educational offerings for LVN members this year, with a focus on 3 educational tracks. So today's webinar is the first in our innovation track. We also have a track on pricing and legal project management, and a third track we're very excited for called Beyond the Technical, which will focus on building school skills, including leadership, managing teams, and negotiation and persuasion strategies. These webinars are also only some of the content available to you as part of the LVN community, which is a growing community of more than 800 business of law professionals now. LVN is delivering curated content, including this webinar series, and also the Council of Luminaries series, a monthly newsletter, Off the Clock podcast, the recently released Legal Pricing and Project Management Survey, and the inaugural and hopefully annual LVN conference that's set for this October 6th to 8th. So mark your calendars for October 6th to 8th and be sure to follow LVN on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can stay up to date there with offerings. So just a couple more housekeeping items and then we'll get into our program. In this Zoom call, the only video feeds you'll see are ours, that of the presenters. Everyone will be on mute except for the presenters, but please feel free to use the chat feature to interact with other attendees. And then you can use the Q&A feature to interact with us and ask questions of the presenters. We will also be recording this session, so it will be available on legalvaluenetwork.com soon after the event. Our plan for today is to have our speakers share their responses to this topic for up to about 12 minutes, and then we'll jump into Q&A. Again, as we go along, feel free to use the Q&A feature in the Zoom toolbar to ask questions, and we'll make sure that we get to those at least in the Q&A session at the end, if not before. And finally, at least for myself, I'll give the disclaimer that my comments are my own and do not express the views of my employer. So with that out of the way, we're ready, I'd say, to talk about hype versus value, delivering and communicating value from innovation. We are now sharing the poll results, so thank you for responding to that. I think as predicted, Bernie's mittens are number one in our year's hype. I got a big kick out of those memes, so I'm glad that everyone appreciated them, or maybe didn't.
I wasn't allowed to vote. I would have voted for the lawyer cat, actually.
Okay, yes. Also brought me much joy a couple weeks ago. Okay, so thank you again for sharing your response to the poll. And now we'll shift into talking about hype and how it affects us as professionals in the broader legal ecosystem. So our introductory slide here shows Gartner's 2020 legal technology hype curve chart. Gartner's hype curve is a visual representation of expectations of new technology, right? And when those expectations match up or don't match up to the value that that technology can deliver. This particular chart that we have up is limited to technology, but I think you can evaluate business methodologies and strategies on this curve as well, including design thinking and things like that. So at the left of the chart, you have the innovation triggers, and that's caused by proof of concept stories of new technology or business methods that garner some media interest and publicity, perhaps before there are even mature products available, and commercial viability is still unproven. So the media hype and even marketing from some of the innovators in the space can generate some high expectations, right, for benefits of those innovations. And then eventually, as the technologies mature and they find their markets, they become more widely adopted, produce value, eventually get to that plateau of productivity. And I think those of us in the legal technology and innovation space can recognize that hype can be a very real part of an innovation cycle. Also, for those of us in this space, the LPPM survey that we discussed, that I mentioned just a second ago, that was produced by LVN and the Blickstein Group, in that 2/3 of the respondents from AmLaw 200 firms said that they have a dedicated innovation function. But what does that mean? And what can clients expect from it? What expectations should they have? So I think recognizing that hype can be a real part of the adoption cycle and marketing. We just want to talk today about how hype impacts us, how maybe not to get burned by hype, both as service providers and as clients, and how to live up to the expectations that get set. So one more thing I'll share to set this scene before handing off to Anna Maria is an example that I have of inflated expectations and how they impacted one of my clients. So a couple of years ago, I had a client who wanted to analyze tens of thousands of their contracts. And based, I think, on media articles and marketing promises, they hoped that AI-assisted contract review could allow them to ask custom questions of those contracts without having to pay a lot of human resources to do that review. And beyond the typical pre-trained questions of governing law, dates, parties, they really wanted to ask custom questions that had the biggest impact on their risk profile going forward. So they invested a lot of time into analyses and trials of a few tools on the market. We also brought in a business partner who knew more about more of the tools on the markets than we did, as a law firm that had experience with some rather than others. And eventually, I think they had high expectations. They were excited to use this technology and get some of the benefits. They heard that they could use, using advanced contract analytics tools as it's shown on this chart. But eventually, after some trials and time invested, they determined that the recall and the accuracy for the custom questions that were important to them just wasn't what they needed for ROI and to prove to the business that they should move forward at that time with adopting that technology. So it was an investment of time and eventually a project that got put on the shelf, I'd say, for a later time. And I think it just illustrates one example of what can happen when trying to be an early adopter of new technologies and business tools, when those tools can deliver value, right? I think a lot of us have used AI-assisted contract review and have gotten value out of those tools. But sometimes when we have those high expectations that may be, as Gartner says, inflated, either by media hype or marketing promises, if they can't then deliver on the expectations, you might slide down into that trough of disillusionment. So one example or illustration of where this could happen. And then today we want to get Anna Maria's thoughts and also Raj's thoughts on how, as service providers, we interact with hype and we can try to live up to the expectations rather than get burned by it. So with that, I will hand the mic to Anna Maria.
Thanks, Amani, and hello everybody. Great to be here with you all today. great setup, I think, Amani, for the discussion that we're going to have today. And just to tell you a tiny little bit more about myself, so that you know where I'm coming from when I'm sort of looking at this hype question. As Amani says, I head up the design thinking team at Baker & McKenzie, but I'm one of those people that's a Baker & McKenzie lifer. So came to innovation via a very circuitous route, starting off as a lawyer, and in fact I trained at Baker's and then tried out all sorts of different roles, really: business development, knowledge. I did some practice management, some business management, and then got into this design thinking idea. And then, as these things happen, partly by design and then partly by just scope creep, the team that I run got involved in innovation more broadly at Baker & McKenzie. And one of the things that I think Amani sort of suggested we might look at to start with is really thinking about this question of innovation and hype. And we've been talking about it for such a long time, and yet it never seems to go away. So it'd be great, looking forward to hearing from some of you, but also Raj as well, as to sort of why some of that is and how we can really try not to fuel that hype, but really sort of think about how we're actually delivering value in this space. But I did want to start off just looking at this idea that there's this gap between what clients want and need and between what service providers might actually be delivering. And I'm sure almost all of us, I'm sure all of us in fact on this call have got stacks of anecdotes that point in that direction. And sure enough, there's plenty of data as well that points to some of those differences. And there's just a couple that I wanted to highlight before delving into this a bit more. And these were two figures that really jumped out at me from some research that Acritas did. And that first one there on the left that I've highlighted, obviously jumped out. And that's like a massive 80% of clients in this particular research carried out by Acritas said that their law firms are underperforming in delivering innovation to them. Now there's some sort of tiny little small print, very loyally small print in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide that you probably can't read, which defines underperformance as scoring less than 9 out of 10. So I suppose if you wanted to be generous to the law firms, you might say, setting a bar of 9 out of 10 is pretty high, but you generally get the point there. And then the other thing that Acritas did that interested me here was that they basically were looking at, they talked to lawyers in law firms that clients had rated as standout lawyers. So 86% of those, super duper standout lawyers thought their own firms had innovative service offerings. But when you match that up against what the clients were saying, only 13% of clients overall recognised any innovation at all from any of their law firms. So again, that really is quite some gap there, a real gulf. I also wanted just to look at a couple of, actually just one data point that came out of that legal pricing and project management survey that Amani mentioned. If you could flick down a couple of slides. So this one I found interesting as well, just because we talk all the time about how important it is to understand, the problem before we go and look at the solution. That's almost become trite, I think. But this stood out to me because you can see here that top line is the legal pricing and legal project management guys at the firms that were surveyed. And they gave their law firms a pretty high score when it comes to truly understanding what clients' problems are. Whereas the bottom line is basically legal ops functions within clients, where the view is more balanced there as to whether are those internal legal ops people making enough of an effort to understand the problems of their own business. Maybe they're a bit more realistic, I don't know, but I very much doubt that if you ask those law firms on that top line that they would agree with that, or they would match that 94% rating. So I was trying to think about, well, really, why is this? Why do we still seeing that gap? We're still hearing, stories that, like Amani's told, about the hype and the mismatch of expectations. And I suppose what I see more and more, and I think I set more and more store by, is really we're just not talking to each other enough. Or, maybe we're doing a lot of talking, but we're not actually communicating. And I do put emphasis on that word enough, because of course, there's fabulous things going on, lots of one-to-one level conversations at the organizational level. There's many forums and organizations that are promoting this kind of understanding and dialogue. But we obviously haven't solved it, that there are obviously still some things going on. And I suppose there are three factors that I just wanted to touch on that I think are sort of playing into this. And if you could just pop to the next slide, Amani, that would be great. And I think one of the things is we talk, but we're just not using the right language. And we talk, but we don't often have the right people talking to each other. And lastly, we never really invest the time in doing this properly. And really talking about language, I mean, here we are, we're all talking about innovation, but what does innovation really mean? And I thought we might do a quick poll here just to see, well, what do you see as innovation? You've got 3 votes, just like a little quick run through. What do you think of as innovation out of that list? And sorry, Raj, that you can't also participate in this poll either.
I'll talk about it later.
So I'm going to let Janet, the mastermind behind the scenes, decide when we've got a good sampling of what we think in this group is innovation.
Looks like we've got 70% have voted, so just a couple more seconds to get your vote in. And there we go.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And of course, in many ways, this was, of course, a trick question because, all those things could be innovation. Other people might not think they are, but really interesting to see actually quite a degree of consolidation there about, transforming ideas into practice or value. And I think that is obviously the absolute antidote to hype, isn't it? When you can actually deliver something. So that's interesting to see that. So just going back to that idea of language and how do we get to that delivery. I mean, for ages, I was trying to get people not even to use the word innovation because, it's just so misleading. And actually, I think it makes us very lazy because we often think we know what we're talking about, but actually we can be quite misaligned in what we're talking about. And I do remember it was probably at least 18 months ago, but I found this blog post which perfectly encapsulated everything I thought about the word innovation. And I was about to launch it into the Baker and McKenzie world and say, see, this is what I'm talking about. And then I noticed the blog post was from I think it was 2006. So in that sort of intervening 14 years, nothing had really changed. And I just thought, oh God, we've really got to do something about this. The second thing that I think is the people, who is involved in having these conversations. And it's, so important to have the right people involved. And as law firms have more and more professionals focused on the whole range of service delivery, not just the legal aspects, I think those professionals have to be involved in those conversations, supporting those conversations and at the table. But then on the other hand, you quite often see this is something that can't be divorced from the client relationship. It can't be divorced from the work that's actually going on the ground. And it can't be something that just gets sort of thrown across the fence to the innovation team, however that's sort of set up in the service provider. So going back to that data point from the legal pricing and project management survey, I'm sure those legal pricing and legal professionals, legal project management professionals were doing that exercise of really understanding the problems the client face. So in their world, probably that 94% rating was justified, but I just don't see necessarily that being embedded across the law firm in the scale that it needs to be. And the last thing is time. I mean, this is, sounds very obvious, but you just can't have this proper kind of dialogue unless you invest the time. So it's who's there, how do you talk to the clients, making sure you've got time to listen to what they're saying, digging behind what the clients are saying to really understand, well, what are they really saying? Where is this coming from? Thinking about what you're hearing and then taking the next step. And that one's very close to the bone for me because, probably something I get asked at least sort of twice or 3 times a week is, oh, can you come and do a design thinking innovation session, for my client? By which, the person asking means, can you come and do a sort of fun 2 hours using lots of post-its, which is sort of fun and but also comes up with an amazing solution for something. And so the acid test for me, if I'm going to go ahead and help somebody with that, is really, is that person prepared to put the time in to figure out, in advance, well, why are we doing a session? What problem are we aiming to solve? And then please talk to your client about what they actually need, help design a session which we can run for the client, participate, and do the all important thinking afterwards, because of course it's not just one session. So that, thinking about, how to invest the time in doing this is just so important. And I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts about how we've tackled some of those problems. And I think our most important mantra is just really meeting our clients where they are. So, of course, many of our clients are, very far advanced along that innovation journey. And even I can't get away from using that word, innovation. But, they've got sophisticated legal ops teams. They're embedding process, alternative resourcing technology in how they're delivering services to their business. But other of our clients are at the very other end of that journey. So they're just starting out thinking about how they might do things differently. And they're starting out on that journey for different reasons, that they might be coming at it from different angles. So if you think about some of those, as I might call them, the more advanced clients, it's almost easier. The dialogue is easier, solving the problems is easier. It's easier to get the right people in the room to tackle, a specific problem. And typically that hype bubble, those expectations that Amani was talking about, they've already been burst. We're all starting from a much more a common understanding. But at that other end of the scale, we often have clients coming to us and saying, well, what's your innovation offering? What legal tech are you using? What AI should we use to innovate? And those conversations need much more work, or maybe it's, maybe a different sort of work. You have to make sure you're starting from sort of common foundations. And there was another really interesting aspect of the Acritas research that I was talking about. So they were looking at what they found to be the biggest difference between law firms that clients rated as innovative and the law firms that were not rated as innovative. The biggest difference was the lawyers in those firms. So they found through their research that lawyers who are the most comfortable and confident in talking about the innovations that their law firms offer, whatever form that innovation took, those were the lawyers that were more likely to have conversations with their clients, which in turn led the way to creative and collaborative working. And so we've been doing a lot of work on building up confidence for our lawyers to have those conversations. So a lot of that is helping them understand it's not necessarily a question about technology. And as Amani was saying, when you look at the Gartner legal innovation hype curve, it's mostly about technology. I think there's a little bubble in there for alternative legal service providers, which is another story. But this isn't about technology. We have to help our lawyers understand that they don't need to understand what AI is at a very deep level. They don't need to have all the answers before they start talking to clients about some of these issues. And we've borrowed a lot of sort of tools and techniques from our design thinking toolkits to help with that. And one thing this just happened to me, it was on Monday, a client had emailed one of our partners saying, oh, we need a presentation on legal tech, what legal tech is out there and what does it do? And that query, eventually sort of made its way to me. But the query was, well, who in the firm can do this presentation? Whereas, of course, I'm winding back and saying, well, actually, let's just take some time to think about this. Why is the client asking this? Have they got a particular problem that they think, technology might be the answer to? Might not even be that technology is the answer, but that's another conversation. Or are they just feeling this sort of pressure to be more efficient, the classic, they need to do more with less? Or are they just feeling this general idea that everybody's innovating and they aren't, and they don't know where to start? So really a lot of what we're doing is coaching our partners and lawyers to have some of those conversations to really get this kind of stuff started, so that we're starting from this common base. And then when it comes to actually sort of really delivering value, I've got lots of stories like that one Amani told in terms of the overinflated expectations of technology. And we've recently done a project like that where we were very explicit with the client about that during the project, and we weren't getting through. And in fact, we ended up having to do a lot of manual work to sort of put right what the technology actually couldn't deliver on this occasion. And we just did a debrief with the client. They're like, oh yeah, you were right about that. So we did get there in the end, but a lot of water passed under the bridge before we got to that point. And actually, I think when you're delivering value, there's something about it that's it's quite boring. So my team's just finished doing something with our banking and finance practice. It's a very niche area within banking and finance. And we're doing some, it's essentially a kind of repapering project. And that involves, there's sort of, yes, there's the process work, there's lots of LPM involvement. We're resourcing some of the work streams through our alternative legal services function. Yes, we're training the document review technology to recognize these sort of slightly, quirky provisions in contracts, and automating the workflow into document automation. So it's all happening. And then there's a lot of times where the senior legal expertise is needed because of these strange ways that this sort of particular kind of work is done. So you have to inject that in at process points along the way. And it's a hard slog to stitch all that together, even with the progress that we've all made. Actually making all this stuff work, takes time and effort. But from the client perspective, the value is certainly there. It's being done more quickly, arguably done to a higher and definitely sort of more consistent standard. That the time management is easier, the budget management is easier, and the ability to deliver fixed fees and so on. So that is delivering value, but it's very hard to say that that's sort of super exciting, or even that it's really innovative, but maybe, that doesn't really matter. And I think the one thing that I think, and maybe this is the plateau of productivity, I don't know, but the thing that excites me more is hearing our lawyers, when we've worked with our lawyers on these types of projects, and then hearing how they're using those techniques, deploying those techniques in their very much their day-to-day with their clients. So an associate was just telling me the other day that he's using this sort of design thinking mindset that he's grown through doing a project when he's thinking about how he puts together his arguments in litigation. So he described it as moving from a linear way of thinking to a more creative, holistic way of thinking. He's using our virtual whiteboard to like visualize the arguments and map them out and move them around to come up with better and more creative ways of putting the case. And it's very hard to calculate what value does that bring, how does that really increase the value to the clients on a one-by-one basis. But I do believe that the more we have our lawyers thinking in those different ways, working in those different days, but incorporated into their day-to-day practice, that's how we'll really drive the collaboration, the better solutions, and really move away from the hype. So that's my perspective, but happy to take questions later, and looking forward to hearing what Raj's perspective is on all this.
As am I, and I think we'll transition to Raj now, because I'm sure
Right.
he has lots to talk about on
Sure.
how we measure value
Yeah.
and communicate it to clients.
Well, afternoon, everybody. And actually, oh yeah, you can keep that slide up. I'll really just I'll try to be brief. I'll try to just go 4 or 5 minutes, and then we can chat and have questions. But Anna Maria, thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. And Amani, thanks for your presentation. I'm Raj Goyle. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Bodala. Really thrilled to be here. Have relationships with the founders of LVM. Thank you to Jonathan Cash very much for sort of initially reaching out, and looks like you've got a great group of 60 participants. Usually when I give public talks, I have my family and my cousins, participate, so we boost the numbers. But I think this is a, authentic, organic audience here. I will come at this with a different perspective. I don't know too much about the organization in the sense of your other speakers. I don't. My sense is that you don't have a lot of technology, providers. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I will say, some of you have made no idea what the hell Bodala is, what it means, how to pronounce it. Some of you have been on the other side of our data, and perhaps not maybe enjoyed the process, which I'll explain in a second. And so what Bodala is we are one of the fastest growing legal tech companies in the country. We're based in the States. We do work around the world. And what we do is we use our software and our machine learning and our algorithms to optimize the outside counsel spend. So there is how we do, and we can obviously have plenty of discussion and in the Q&A about sort of how we do that and why. I don't want this to be sort of so much about Bodala so much as it is about the trends in the industry, and I think why you probably asked me to speak. And so we do have some, we are still on, we have grown considerably for the age of our business, but still in the grand scheme, we're a relatively small business. We are a growth technology company, though. We have exponential growth in our revenue, and we raised about $10 million to date, and we still have a lot more, a lot more room to run. And so that's the fun part. Obviously, I'm in a technology business. You are in the quintessential services industry. So you are, and I shall say, I will not name check her, but I guess you could Google. My wife is an equity partner at a big fancy law firm. And so I'm a Harvard Law graduate from 25 years ago. I never practiced, but my co-founder was at Simpson Thacher for 10 years. We have people at my business who are littered from all big law firms, some smaller firms, and so on. We obviously have data scientists and machine learning specialists and AI folks who have no legal background, but frankly, probably know more about legal billing than, we probably have the largest actionable data set of legal bills in the world. Because of the way our systems work and so our data science team has probably run more analysis and algorithms on the legal bills than everybody on this call combined. Not because they are very smart, but it's because we have a machine behind us that we built. We have this thing called cloud computing. We're not manually in Excel spreadsheets and with Tableau, trying to do analysis and PowerPoints. We are running a true AI machine that is taking the billions and trillions of line items, every comma in a line item in a narrative, and making sense of it and doing pattern analysis. And that's ultimately, AI is in the eye of the beholder. Some people, the poll, I'm still miffed about the Bernie's mittens. I really don't think that was the most over, but we'll have to talk about that later. But the poll indicates, what does AI mean? I run an AI business, and I can tell you AI is often thought very falsely to mean this robotic HAL 2000. I'm dating myself with that reference, or the Minority Report, that great Tom Cruise movie, which as a side note, I think will become very prescient in the decades to come of the way that we're using predictive thinking. But we think of it, and law firms inherently will say, AI, oh my God, the robots are coming to take over the lawyers. What a bunch of bullshit. I mean, come on, law firms are never more profitable. Well, sure, on one hand, and Anna Maria, you largely focused on contract management, and Amani in your comments, but AI encompasses many, many things. A true technologist would say AI is taking massive data sets and doing pattern analysis to yield insights. Those insights can mean many things. And let's be clear, there is AI coming that will displace many legal functions, without a doubt. And incumbents will always hold on to power, and they will do everything they can to do that. So, if law firms do want to say, hey, look, I always will need to, make sure that I advise my client, 100% that's the case. But clearly, machines will not yet, and, in the hype cycle and so on. Of course, the contract management, for example, that's not what Bodala does. We optimize outside counsel spend. But of course, contract management isn't quite ready for prime time in a transformative way yet, but it will get there. I mean, there's not even a question that many, many, many of the billions of billable hours right now will be able to be done at a certain level. And as technology grows, it will start displacing more and more up the value chain of what's happening at law firms. This is not a debate. This is a fact. And so, that's kind of point number one. The second thing I'll say, because there's a lot of talk, and maybe I'll get a little bit of say, hey, we talk a lot about hype at law firms. I would be remiss if I didn't take the quick jab at the oxymoron of innovation at a law firm. And I think that was in the Q&A. I think that's perhaps a great example of some hype as well, because let's be clear, a law firm is a billing model which bills out hours at the highest profit margin you can. Let's not kid ourselves about what we do or what you do. That is a law firm's existence, and it is extraordinarily profitable and extraordinarily powerful. Why would there be any interest from incumbents, as I like to say, to change that? And this last year in 2020, don't need to tell you, you guys have had record years. And by the way, because costs plummeted because of travel and so on, probably profit per partner is going to be at a record high. A slight footnote: I think your clients are increasingly aware of these things, and so the point is that when I think about innovation in the industry at large, there was the slide said there was a trough of disillusionment. That is absolutely true. There is a software hype cycle without a doubt. There is huge amounts of vaporware in the industry in every vertical. where people will come in and say, oh, I can come in here and tell you exactly what something should cost down to the penny. Well, that's not quite true. And certainly in contract management and down the line. That being said, there is a trough of disillusionment in the current status quo that is considerable. There is a disillusionment over ever increasing rates, over ever increasing lack of transparency, and over, at the end of the day, an industry that basically says, look, I'm going to talk about a lot of things we could do differently, but fundamentally I'm sticking with a tried and true service delivery model, which is really about relationship ownership, client delivery, billables, and profit margin, which are the fundamental building blocks of a massive $500 billion industry. So a few quick points, and then we can get to the Q&A, which is, what I would say is that when you talk about, I think, Anna Marie, you made a quick reference to ALSPs, which obviously is a whole nother topic. The unbundling of legal services is an absolute demonstrable trend. So what does that mean? Increasingly, our clients, and again, I should have said earlier, we work with some of the largest private equity firms in the world, insurance carriers, manufacturers, and so on. We have a client with a couple $2 billion in outside spend. We have clients with several $1 million USD in spend. And we talk to them constantly. Where would you like this to go? So, for example, the notion that due diligence on an M&A deal can be done through an ALSP. Now, to be clear, high-level advisory, of course you need that fancy partner, who's done 25 years of deals and all of that, and has the soft touch, and there's political factors to that. But the notion that there is further and further unbundling, because if you think about the classic law firm delivery model, is you hire me, okay? And there is a funny line that hiring a lawyer is a no-bid contract to your good friend who overbills you. I had to get that line in, but you own this relationship, and then you own the entire chain from, if you go high level, you go low, you go high, you go low. So I'm billing you for everything. If I'm thinking about it, if I've thought about a term in a PPM, or there's a clause, and I save this client $1 million or $1 billion, but I'm charging that same unit of time out for when I'm checking my email, right? What an economist would obviously call that dynamic pricing. The value of the first thing is incalculable. The lawyer should be paid huge amounts for that, but there's obviously some frustration that I'm paying that out because there's not dynamic pricing, because I'm a time-based, I'm a time and materials business model. So the desire from the client base to unbundle and to make sure that, that I can actually get, cheaper delivery, still very high quality on some of those tasks, that's something that we obviously pick up on. The second thing is that, and this gets, and Anna Marie, you touched on it, but the thing that you hear from clients a lot, and it's not yet, and I'll say Bodala is part of this for sure. We are the tip of the spear, but I can almost say with certainty that as $1.5 billion in the last 12 months has rolled into legal tech. Legal tech, a little side note, but an important one, has been a stepchild of the venture capital industry. So for any of you actually hang out with the private equity world, the venture capital world, legal was like, oh God, are you kidding? Law firms have that down pat. Whoever thinks, lawyers and innovation, this is a little bit like, let's be clear. It's not as if people think when you Wikipedia law firms, they think, oh, wow, that's best of breed of innovation. If you recall, law firms were originally against email. There were partners who said, I won't trust the sensitive documents of my clients in electronic mail. I need the pouches and the couriers. And then, of course, law firms opposed e-discovery until the clients foisted that on. And now now there's a whole massive industry. I just talked to a $1 billion business today. It's an e-discovery. And, that was in litigation. But the fundamental point is that clients say all the time, why doesn't a law firm tell me how much this matter should cost? Like, for the love of God, you've done it 1,000,000 times. The law firm has done it tens of millions of times. Why is it so speculative and open-ended? I think, let's be clear, we all know the reason, because the price of a legal matter is the price that the law firm can get. And yes, there are some guardrails around it, but you're rewarded for higher billables. And so the one article that I very much commend you to read is our good friend, the former general counsel of General Electric. Many of you know Alex Dmitriev, who also was a very successful partner at Kirkland. So he's been on both sides of this. He's got an amazing article, and I will maybe I can send it to Amani so the link can get out there. Commend everybody to read it on billing. And what does he say? He said that inability for the law firm to tell me what this thing should cost was his biggest frustration point. And billing is a little bit of this, like, again, nobody wants to talk about it. You want to focus on all these cool things we can do, and I can deliver you the value. The law firm kind of, the client sort of doesn't like the billing process. The law firm doesn't spend enough time, except to maybe maximize it, but to give the client the sort of transparency the client might like about that bill. And so Alex's article really nails that out. And just to give you the anecdote on the notion of the should cost, is I was at a Consero conference, and somebody said, I work at an aerospace company. We submit a contract that is binding to the federal government about the price of a rocket that we haven't even built yet, and that it's 20 years in the future, and we price it to a penny. But this goddamn litigator can't tell me how much this motion's going to cost. Why doesn't the litigator do it? Because he does not want to, because it's antithetical to the interest of the billing model of the vendor. And so it's neither wrong nor right, but it is. And so that notion of the should cost is an important thing that we hear from our clients. And I'll just end my comments with this, which is, I'll be very direct. I don't think I've held back from my views. Innovation will not be driven from the service provider side of this market. It just does not make sense. If you just step back and think, and Anne-Marie, you talked about it, and you mentioned that there's obviously, things where everybody wants a kind of a dog and pony show, my words, not yours, but a dog and pony show around, hey, let's do, design thinking is amazing. Obviously, as a technology CEO, love design thinking, and that should happen in construction and healthcare and everything. And design thinking is still not design thinking about how we restructure a law firm economic model. Maybe it's about service delivery and so on. But what I would say is that clients and your clients made the e-discovery revolution happen. They made you do e-billing. They made you, and that's right. That's the client. That is what the buy side of the market should be doing. So innovation, I would say, really is going to be driven on the buy side of the market. And I will, I guess in classic lawyer fashion, I have one more comment, which is just to say, if you think about a buy side and a sell side, and law firms are inherently on the sell side, and buy side is the client side, of course. There are 5 key attributes in a normal, efficient market of what a buy side enjoys, which is the price discovery, competition, the benefit of data, the benefit of innovation, and accountability on the sell side. So the best example and a consumer example is getting a hamburger. Okay, if McDonald's tries to charge me $17 for the Big Mac, the trade doesn't clear. Why? Because there's a market price for that Big Mac. And I know that that's crazy. And I've got many, many, many options. I can go get a $50 burger with foie gras at DB Bistro, which I may or may not have had in the past, in Midtown Manhattan. Or I can go to Five Guys, or I can whatever it is. And I've got price discovery, competition. All 5 attributes don't exist in our industry. They just don't exist. And if an economist really studied this market, they would show it's not really inefficient. There's not even a market, right? Your clients don't compete. You don't compete for work in the classic way that an efficient market has to compete. So if this industry ever did move toward an efficient market where the buy side had the leverage that the buy side should have, it's not about a race to the bottom. It is about collaborative partnerships and relationships and getting risk mitigation 100%. But it is about a buy side having the benefit that the buy side deserves to have. So I'll just pause there.
Thanks, Raj. Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes towards sustaining versus disruptive innovation, that Clayton Christensen idea of different types of innovation. And certainly it's fair to say, I think, incumbents are almost never the source of disruptive innovation. Yeah. It's counter to their incentives. Well, but we still...
since you named check Professor Christensen, I'll just say I just talked to his son last week, Matt Christensen, who runs a venture firm. He's a great guy, based on his dad's theories, and I think that's exactly right. And I just want to point out, it is, to underscore, in our view, it is not a race to the bottom or a good versus bad dynamic. It's just a market. And all we're talking about are those market forces. And, and the market, if it's efficient, will sort out who the winners and losers are. And that gets to Anna Maria's point. The innovative will survive and thrive and make more money, and those who won't. And that's the way capitalism works at its ideal form.
Yeah, and there's still sustaining innovation happening at incumbents, or hopefully happening in order to stay incumbents. So it's still, you do have to, adopt new and innovative ways to remain in the incumbents in the market. So my first question, and I'm hoping that we get some additional questions here in the Q&A. So audience, feel free to add additional questions. But one that I wanted to pick up on was, I think, highlighted by both of you, this concept of buzzwords, which also is very related to hype, I would say, and that when we have these words get overused in a market, they can lose their meaning, and then too many people can claim they mean too many things, right? I was at Legal Week a couple of weeks ago, and someone in an e-discovery talk said, "I hate the word AI," but then he proceeded to tell a story of how he delivered value with AI, right? With a tool that had machine learning, natural language processing, and it helped them highlight a insight from a body of data that the humans actually questioned multiple times, and they had to drill in, and it was the tool that they used, the TAR e-discovery tool, that helped them find that insight, right? But he said, "I hate the word AI because the lawyers don't believe in it anymore." It was clearly in that trough of disillusionment, but he had to show them, by using the tool, by showing the value, and then he was able to make some maybe skeptics into evangelists, right? So I'm curious, I'll ask Raj first. When you are selling into, legal departments, do you find that some people are actually looking for terms like machine learning and they want to hear how you're using the analytics? Or do you go back to also just kind of, your value statements and what you can deliver? I'm curious if there's a mix of that.
Super great question. I'll give you a 30-second answer, which is there are some clients, but rarely, who want the buzzwords. But of course, there's a lot of crap out there, for sure. But it's the latter, Amani, for sure. It's the same thing for law firms. It's about, what pain points are you solving for me? What are you doing for me? What is practically, how do I use this data? How do I use this information? And I'll say we lose some deals because people will say, for example, this data is amazing. You have truly unmasked pricing. You're giving me specific benchmarks of what Baker should cost in this practice area. You're comparing them to the appropriate clusters of firms. You're not just making up the pricing here. However, I don't think I'm going to action this data. I really just don't think I'm going to, because the relationships are set and I don't want to disrupt that. I'd be disingenuous if I didn't say we encounter that. Of course we do. So it is about pain points solution, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think Anna Maria, you would second that when you talked about communicating with the clients and understanding the problems, right? Falling in love with the problems and understanding what they're trying to get at.
I mean, and I really get that point about, people, I've even said, I don't like the word innovation, or I don't like the word AI, but that is, what you're using. But for me, it drives so much miscommunication that you just always have to come back to the specifics. And I think one of the things which maybe is not quite in line with what Raj was saying, but every day we're answering pitch responses which ask us to say, what are you doing? What's your innovation offering? What AI are you using? And that is more of a tick box exercise. I think, well, that doesn't move either side forward, and that's why I'm so keen on this idea of dialogue. And I think
if I could,
Gordon.
Oh,
sorry, I'll just finish. I was just going to say somebody. I think it was Gordon's question in the Q&A is how do you get that to happen then? And I think it is by I would say this because I'm, now a sort of a design thinking convert, but really having to dig into, behind what people are saying and get people together and really, talk about it.
I'm sorry to have interrupted earlier, Anne-Marie. I just wanted to say, in my experience, I think I've heard that, there was a major law firm, a top 20 law firm that had something like 3,000 RFPs on their docket. And one of the things we'll say is that we think a lot of these RFPs, they're not going to stop. They're the wave of the future for sure, but they're not well done. And so I would suggest, if I had to guess, Anna Maria, is that you have to answer the question all the time, but I'm almost sure that no decisions are being made on the answer to that question.
I'm sure that's right.
It's,
I'm sure
it's
that's right.
Total vapor, and it's a pain in the ass for you because you got to say, oh, what are we doing? All this stuff. And so, but ultimately, what we have found is that, the decision maker on the procurement of legal service is often the line attorney, not that that's a technical term, but is the attorney. And what's odd about it is that in more innovative and mature, frankly, departments of big companies, the buyer and the user and the buyer are different. So what happens, right, is that, say in marketing, the buyer of the user of the services gets to have his or her preference, but the economic terms are negotiated in a central fashion. And so what's interesting about legal is that, oftentimes it's very decentralized, and the actual person who's hiring Baker McKenzie and using that partner at Baker McKenzie is handling the fees and is handling the value, handling the economics of it. And that's another big trend, which is more and more legal departments are realizing that that's not best for the corporate enterprise.
Thank you. We have a question in the Q&A from Gerald, and this is a question initially directed to Anna Maria. It says, using Christensen's language of sustaining and disruptive innovation, how is your firm interacting with and competing against ALSPs as they continue to improve quality and come up market? He also adds, although they've started with some rote and less complex work, they may continue to move upstream as clients become more comfortable and regulations change.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I was reflecting back on this idea of where does innovation come from? Is it ever going to be from the law firms themselves? And you won't be surprised to hear that you do have to prompt people in a law firm whose invested interests aren't necessarily in changing as quickly as somebody like me might like. But you do see, of course, we're looking at, where's the market going? And that's one of the factors that you use to make sure that the people within law firms are thinking about how they want to sort of, where do they want to be in the future? So that's why, you do things like, some of the more experimental stuff, but also, the investments that we make in our own alternative legal services, LPM and so on. But having said that, it's you always think, well, actually, we're never going to compete with those. Fundamentally, it's more about delivering the services that we all deliver in a better way. But I take your point that one of the things is how much further up the market do they go.
Yeah, I saw Raj typed an answer, but did you want to speak, Raj, to that one as well?
No, I put it in the chat. So,
Okay.
I just want to point out that the quote disruption, remember, I know the topic here is tech, and I run a tech company. Something that has zero to do with technology, like nothing. Factor law is doing very well. And I put I put it in the chat, like they go to a client and say, hey, look, keep your high level stuff, but the low level stuff should be done over here. And, you're a general counsel and you sit here and say, wow, I can take $2 million out of my budget and maybe I can hire more in-house people and so on. So ALSPs, sometimes it's easy to focus on the tin foil over here of like, all these other, but like just the labor arbitrage is something to watch for as well.
Yeah, we are actually interested in having an entire webinar on the topics of sustaining versus disruptive innovation and applying it to legal. And I'm curious, and maybe we'll talk about the market or lack thereof and how that impacts innovation in this particular market. And to your point as well, disruptive innovation is typically, at least in the Clayton Christensen theories, it's really business models, right? And moving up that value chain, as Gerald's question alludes to. And as I don't remember it talking much about hype, to bring it back to our topic for today, because usually some of those very disruptive business models or technologies can start off maybe not generating a lot of hype or start at the bottom of a market and then deliver an increasingly valuable proposition to the market. So
yeah, I mean, one quick book for those of people interested in disruption theory is Crossing the Chasm.
yeah.
This is more, so the Crossing the Chasm is a Bible for if you're in my seat, which is how do you grow from this small little cocktail napkin of an idea. And it's consistent with Christensen disruption theory, which is you get early adopters and visionaries, and then you quote cross the chasm into mainstream acceptance. And that's kind of how a software company goes. I might suggest that the law, I don't think, is as ripe for disruption as it is just for transformation. And you can play these semantic word games all day, but I don't think it's anytime imminent where somehow that general counsel is going to not turn toward outside law firms or stay in his or her pattern. But there's definitely going to be transformations through unbundling, through spend optimization, through machine learning as contract management improves. It will continue to chip away at incumbents. And for what it's worth, one last little comment is, it's often in Christensen theory that profits are fattest for the incumbents before the fall. I'm not predicting that whatsoever, but that if you look at the best example is Uber and taxi prices, where the New York City taxi medallion was at its apogee, before the disruptive technology came in and just destroyed it. And so, the fact that like it's very, very, very good right now for law firms, again, under that theory, I'm not necessarily ascribing to it, is actually can be a harbinger of the opposite.
Yeah. And I think the answer to Jonathan Cash's question in the Q&A, is there a formula for success to get past hype and drive value, may also come in that book. Jeffrey Moore, I think, is the author of Crossing the Chasm.
Yeah.
And the trough of disillusionment also may be somewhat correlated to that chasm. But so that is a good book recommendation. So I'm just quick time check. We have about 2 minutes of our hour left. So I want to give, if there's any final thoughts that either of you would like to give on the topic, maybe just closing statements from both of you, or we can make sure we did have one more question. When can hype be good hype? Maybe let's close out on a positive note. How do we use good hype?
That's an interesting question, Ken. Good hype for me is where I can use it to get the attention of people to move things forward, and then you carefully have to sort of, just make sure that once you've got their attention, you're then moving people into that sort of more realistic plane of what's achievable now. And we're doing a collaboration with an AI company right now, and that has caused lots of great things to happen, but some of it isn't. Some of it is hype, because people think, oh great, now we can do something totally magical that actually we can't do, but it's at least grabbed some attention. So I think you can get good out of it, but it's a weapon that you have to wield with quite a lot of care.
Agreed. Raj, good hype?
There's all new ideas are good, so I definitely think there's some hype that's good hype for sure. Maybe that's a derivation on the old line that all press is good press, right? But look, I don't think anybody would disagree with the notion that we have to think of new ways of doing things, particularly in the law. The law is a central function in our economy and our society, and the law should be better. And I'm speaking more as an American here, but our legal system is not operating at its best for the needs of our economy and our country, and that should be important to us all. So I think all new ideas are great. All other our brother and sister technology companies, I root them all on. I hope there's an efficient market in this industry that roots out the winners and the losers, and everybody does as well as they can.
Yeah, and I hope the high expectations of our clients can drive us to deliver better services. 100%. So thank you both. Thank you, Anna Maria. Thank you, Raj. Thank you for being with us for the hour. I'll close out and just remind folks to check in on the content that's available to LVN members, and hope you found value in our webinar today. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.